Alright, so welcome back. Here's that one last comparison I bet you were really looking forward to. So welcome to the Sennheiser HD8XX, 800, and 800S side-by-side comparison. So I've had my HD800 for a couple of years now, and with the use of some EQ here and there, I've come to really like them. Right around the time I filmed the HD820 review, I bought a pair of HD800S, so I could have all three for the comparison. So when I heard about the HD8XX's conception, I decided to keep them around for that. And so here we are. Been a long time coming, but which of these will take the cake? Let's find out now. Sennheiser HD8XX versus HD800 and 800S. The Battle of the Gods. So let's start off with the contents here. So as you'd probably expect, the contents for these are extremely similar. The outer boxes will be a little different for each, so do expect that. As far as the cables go, the HD800S now comes with a single-ended cable as well as a Pentagon balance cable, so you can choose how to run them. And in case you were wondering, they're all made of that same nasty vacuum cleaner type of material. Seriously, Sennheiser, I doubt that is necessary. Other than that, everything else is exactly the same. Now let's take a look at the build quality and the comfort here. Yeah, it's honestly all the same. The only build difference is regarding the paint on the outer portion of the headphones. The original HD800 utilized a type of coating that easily acquired scratches if you weren't careful. See, you can see a couple of nicks right here, and I did not apply those. I bought them that way, by the way. Now both the HD800S and the newer HD8XX have that black layer of coating that's more of a plastic coating as opposed to a thin layer of paint. Also, I'm not sure why, but the HD800 feel a tad more comfortable to me. The cups just feel like they fit me a tad better, while the other two feel like they place a lot more force around the bottom of the cups rather than the top. I don't know why. Now let's get to some amplification here. Since these headphones are all 300 ohms, they pretty much all require the same amount of power to drive them. With all of these in single-ended, I ran them at about 130 on gain 1, 11 on gain 2, and 930 on gain 3. Through balanced, I ran them at around 11 on gain 1 and 9 on gain 2. That said, I did happen to turn the HD800 down a teensy notch from each of those levels just because of the more apparent treble spike. Not even a half level, I mean just a teensy little turn on the knob, the slightest turn. And now let's approach the sound. So once again, the following impressions were taken without the use of any EQ whatsoever. We'll discuss those applications during the notes and observations portion of this review. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. Let's start off with the bass here. So right off the bat, the 8XX is still within the same ballpark as the 800 and 800S. However, its bass impact definitely seems like the most restrained out of the three. The 800 sits in the middle, with the 800S adding just a little bit of heft to that. While both of those headphones present the bass notes with impact and let them fade out, the 8XX doesn't quite do that. Bass notes will just appear and present themselves, and then disappear quickly. There's far less of a decay occurring after every note. Same thing with bass guitars. The 8XX are the most recessed of the bunch and are actually the coldest too. The 800S have the most warmth and rumble to the bass notes, while the 800 offer a slightly more tame version of that. The 8XX are even more tame and really remove a lot of that warmth. So here's an example for you. Saturn's Bars by Gorillaz. In the intro, there's that bass note that forms a kind of like a bed for sounds to sit on. You know, you got those notes creating like a wave, and then you've got the sound sitting on that wave. The 800 are on the lighter side of things. They've got excellent sub bass, but it's not in your face either. The 800S take it up a tiny notch and give you a more forward and juicier version of that bass response, which admittedly helps the sub bass feel a little more exciting. Then the 8XX just take away that warmth. There's barely any rumble or like a bed forming down there after the main point of impact. Now at the 24-second mark, you'll notice an electronic note in the background behind Popcon's vocals. This note sounds the most detailed on the HD800. On the 800S, it loses a smidge of detail while gaining a tiny bit of presence just because of that extra warmth in the mid-bass. The 8XX offers about as much detail on it as the HD800, except a lot colder. Now, drums are roughly the same. The 8XX just sound hollow in comparison to the other two. While the HD800 and 800S are roughly similar, with the 800S offering a slightly thicker timbre, The 8XX are akin to hitting a big plank with a hammer in an empty house. So you see a plank, right? You see a plank, you got a hammer. You get the idea. Yeah, man, the bass suffers quite a bit at stock frequencies here. And now let's take a look at the mids. Let's bring forth an example right from the start. Dream On by PMJ. The 800 and 800S are very similar in this regard, with female vocals being a little smoother on the 800S. The 8XX, however, they don't even hold a candle here. Vocals aren't all that different, but the instruments in the background are just disgusting. There's just like a tube-like effect to them that makes them sound really hollow. That said, the 8XX are better at getting you to pay attention to the separation of instruments and where they lie. It's sort of like the 800 and 800S offer you that, and then you listen to it and go like, oh man, there it is, and there that is. The 8XX tell you like, hey, pay attention how this is over here, and that is over here. It just kind of, I can't explain how, but it just kind of brings it towards your attention a little more. Now, the cello solo in this track is the perfect example of a give and take scenario. So the 800 are the least detailed of the bunch, but do offer the best timbre for the cello. The 800S then present a little more detail to every pluck and vibration of the string, but introduce a very, and I mean very, slight amount of nasal type of timbre, just a little nasal. Nothing to complain about though. The 8XX then introduce a noticeable amount of additional detail, but take a noticeable hit in the timbre. The cello's range isn't right at the heart of where the timbre drops the ball in the mids, but it sits near it, to the point where you can hear that something is just a little off with the cello. So to summarize the mids, it's a give and take. The HD800 are the least detailed of the bunch, but offer the best timbre, in my opinion. The 800S take detail up a notch, but can be a bit wacky in some scenarios. Not really though. And then the 8XX offer the most detail of these three, but it's blatantly obvious that the timbre in the mids is a train wreck. It's just a train wreck. Treble time. Let's start with the consonant range. So the 800 is infamous for the treble spike in this region. On the worst of tracks, it can get a little intense and force you to either EQ that out or simply lower the volume. The 800S mitigate that issue a bit, though they're still intense in the treble department, sticking true to their ancestors' characteristics. The 8XX stay about the same in terms of intensity, with the exception of the consonant region showing a tiny little bit of a reduction. Now, one thing's for sure though, while listening to Bangarang by Skrillex, I did notice that both the HD800S and 8XX offer a blacker background than the 800s. That is to say, there's less noise in the top end, which makes the pertinent instruments stand out more and stand a bit cleaner. I also noticed this in Cowboys from Hell by Pantera. The cymbals pop out just a little bit more on both of these, but they sound much clearer by comparison. Either way, all three of these are on the brighter side of things, so if you're not into that, it may be best to look elsewhere. Now let's discuss soundstage and imaging. So let's get something straight here. All three of these are soundstage and imaging kings. You can pick either one of these and your socks will be knocked off. That said, let's dig a little deeper. As far as soundstage is concerned, the 800 and the 8XX are now tied, both of which being a little wider than the 800S. The 8XX's soundstage is a bit strange though. It kind of sounds like there's a chasm at the very center of it, and everything else is sort of pushed to the sides. So in a way, it's almost like it's cheating to obtain that larger soundstage. Now with imaging, it gets very interesting. So both the 800S and the 8XX have a leg up against the original HD800. They have a little extra wow factor behind them and present that separation of instruments a little more clearly. And believe it or not, the 8XX sometimes beats the 800S at it too. I know. And now let's discuss the notes and observations of this comparison. Let's start by discussing EQ. The HD800 really only had minor issues to them tonally. Thankfully, the following EQ manages to tame that treble peak at the 6K mark while keeping the headphone's natural characteristics. Also, that boost at 30 Hz merely serves to mitigate bass roll-off. So I had a few more gripes with the 800S, and while I tried to EQ them out, I couldn't fully do so. I tried getting rid of their own spike, that sibilance in the S region, this consonant region, which causes sibilance. And while I tamed it a bit, I couldn't make it go away. Now I did add just a tiny little reduction to the mid bass just to bring it down a bit. It barely does anything, but hey, you know, a little better than stock. And of course, that boost at 30 Hz for sub-bass extension. Now, in case it wasn't obvious enough, the 8XX are chock full of timbre issues, so I definitely went in there with the EQ. Thankfully, the issues affecting the lows and the mids get mitigated, but not entirely eliminated. Some warmth returns to the sound signature and mids don't sound as hollowed out. As for the treble though, there's really not much I can do for it there. Even though its timbre is the least wonky, there's still some plasticky issues with it when it comes to treble forward tracks, especially electronic tracks. Tubes! So I used the dark voice with the stock tubes because yes, I've yet to get to it. Generally though, it just gave a bit of a push towards the low end and high end. I wouldn't say any of these benefit from tubes unless you're pairing them with some warm and dark tubes, which I do not currently have. And so we get to the conclusion. Headphone A, headphone B, headphone C. Let's piece this all together. In my previous comparison of the HD800 line, I mentioned that I like both the 800 and the 800S, and at their current price points, they're each worth it for a Summit Fi headphone. So where does the 8XX come into play? Yeah, it's a no for me. Were there no timbre issues, I would have said that they're fantastic. They're very detailed, pretty comfortable, and possess quite a bit of factors that make them amazing. But when you realize that you can get a more correct version of the 8XX for just a couple $100 more brand new, I think it's clear that you should just spend that extra amount. Look, I know it's an extra couple $100, I realize that, but how disappointed are you going to be that you spent nearly $1,000 on a headphone and you decided to cheap out at the very end just because you wanted to save a couple extra $100? I know it's a lot to take in, but trust me, go for it. And again, if the HD800 and 800S did not exist, I would have kept these, EQ'd them, and loved them despite their flaws. They're not terrible. Despite everyone telling you they're absolute garbage, they're not total garbage. They definitely have a lot of redeeming qualities to them. But in a world where these two exist, they get outranked and outclassed and outmatched, and no, just no. Look, we live in a world where you can get the HD800 and experience a very similar experience for around $700, or spend around the same price you bought the 8XX for to get an 800S pre-owned from someone. Either way you go, it's still going to be the better choice. And so that does it for me. So I really hope this video helped your purchasing decision and helped, tame your wallet from saying, you gotta buy them and try them. Well, if you already have these, don't even bother. Stick to these two. If you don't have another choice and you have to go the 8XX route, you can EQ them and they'll be pretty decent. And they'll definitely have their pros despite their cons, but just stick to these. Anyways, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, ciao.